Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. Welcome to episode 2 of the Lost Media series. It's an exploration of videos that have in one way or another become lost, hidden, or perhaps they just never existed at all. I think people find these lost media stories interesting because usually there's just enough information to give you a rough idea of what might be on the tape, but it's vague enough that your mind has to do a lot of work filling in the gaps with whatever horrific details you can conjure up. In Stephen King's book Danse Macabre, he talks about the horror of the unseen. Here he's talking about the classic horror story The Monkey's Paw. He says, "It's what the mind sees that makes this story such a quintessential tale of terror. It is the unpleasant speculation called to mind when the knocking on the door begins. Nothing is there but the wind when she finally opens the door. But what, the mind wonders, might have been there." The first piece of lost media that we're going to explore today is the final moments of Colin Scott. Colin Scott was a psychology graduate who, on June the 7th, 2016, was visiting the Yellowstone National Park with his sister Sable. It was a warm summer's day, and the pair were in high spirits as they took in the beautiful natural surroundings of the park. Sable was recording the entire trip on her mobile phone. That footage is now locked away. Authorities won't release any of the footage that she recorded that day. Our knowledge of what was on those recordings comes mainly from official reports. Allegedly, the video shows the two of them exploring Yellowstone National Park. At some point they decide to venture off the official path, a decision that park officials strongly advise against. Yellowstone National Park, whilst beautiful, is home to various dangers that unwary visitors should be aware of. The park has a variety of wildlife, including grizzly bears, black bears, and wolves. The most recent fatality in Yellowstone involves a woman who encountered a grizzly bear on a trail. However, deaths resulting from animal attacks are relatively rare. More commonly, fatalities in Yellowstone are caused by drownings and burns from the park's geothermal features. Yellowstone National Park is renowned for its spectacular geysers and hot springs. These unique features result from the supervolcano lying beneath its surface. Visitors are strongly advised to maintain a safe distance from these geothermal areas, and entering the hot springs is strictly prohibited. Park officials take these precautions very seriously, and the park's website cautions, "Yellowstone's scenic wonders are sure to take your breath away, but don't let them take your life." The camera, had its footage been available, would likely have shown Colin and Sable walking along the wooden boardwalk that crosses Norris Basin. This is one of the oldest and most dangerous areas of Yellowstone Park, a highly unpredictable area with extreme geothermal activity. At some point they decided to climb off the boardwalk and walk out onto the surface of Norris Basin to get a closer look at the geysers and hot pools. It's thought that they were purposely looking for a hot spring to jump into. It's an activity known as hot potting. It's risky, but if you find a pool that isn't too hot, it is possible. What wouldn't have been immediately obvious to Colin and Sable is that the majority of pools in Norris Basin are highly acidic, and most of them have temperatures close to boiling point. Eventually though, they found what they were looking for. It appeared to be the perfect place for hot potting, a small hot spring approximately 6 feet by 4 feet in size. Apparently the footage shows Colin walking close to the pool. He intended to test the temperature of the water before deciding to jump in. Moments later he appears to slip and falls right in. Unfortunately for him, the water was around 93 degrees C, very close to boiling point, and it was highly acidic. Without the footage, however, it is impossible to determine exactly what his final moments looked like. The report states that the video shows Colin falling into the water and the moments immediately afterwards when Sable realised that her brother was in serious trouble. Probably at this point, Collin had begun screaming in agony and desperately trying to climb out. Sable then attempts to pull Collin out of the water, and she sustains some burns herself in the process. Astonishingly, the reports state that she was still recording as she was trying to pull her brother out of the water. As I stated before, the water was slightly below boiling, about 93 degrees C. It was enough to cause extreme burns, but not to kill him immediately. It would have been an extremely drawn out experience, and the fact that he wasn't able to pull himself out of the water shows the kind of pain and damage that it was doing to his body in a very short space of time. In one report on Quora, I found someone who had witnessed a similar experience. It says, "In one case I know of, a worker slipped and fell into a machine filled with very hot but not boiling water. He reportedly took about 4 minutes to stop screaming." After unsuccessfully trying to pull her brother out of the water, Sable attempted to call for help, but she found that she had no phone signal. We can assume that it was around this point that the recording ended. She was forced to leave her brother and seek help at a nearby museum. By the time they got back to the hot spring, Collin was dead. By now the temperature in the pool had reached 100 degrees C. All that could be seen of Colin Scott was his hands, head and upper torso. According to the park ranger's report, a V-neck style t-shirt could be seen, and what appeared to be a cross was visible and resting on the subject's face. They did attempt to recover Collin's remains from the hot spring, but they were soon forced to stop and retreat to safety. An approaching storm and increasing geothermal activity in Norris Basin significantly worsened the conditions in the area. The park rangers carefully navigated their way out of the basin before the storms hit. This meant that the body recovery operation was postponed to the next day, but that too proved to be unsuccessful. By the time the authorities returned to the hot spring where Colin Scott had fallen, there was no sign of the body. As it turned out, the highly acidic, boiling water had completely dissolved Colin Scott's body. The only items that authorities managed to recover from the water were his flip-flops and wallet. Colin Scott's death isn't unique. More than 20 people have died in the hot springs and geothermal pools in Yellowstone National Park. What makes Colin Scott's death different is that it was caught on camera. The second piece of lost footage that we're going to discuss today is the final parachute jump of Ivan McGuire. At 35 years old, Ivan McGuire was a highly experienced parachutist with over 800 jumps under his belt. He worked as a photographer. He would jump out of a plane alongside a jump instructor and their client, recording the jump from his camera. On April 2nd, 1988, McGuire was busy at work at the Franklin County Sports Parachute Center. He had already recorded 2 jumps that day and he had 1 more to go. They took off successfully, and once the plane reached an altitude of 10,500 feet, McGuire grabbed his camera and began recording. Now, there is some of this footage available. It's appeared in various documentaries and news segments, but it's only a short part of the whole recording. The video captures the final preparations for the jump. McGuire jumps out of the plane just before the instructor and students. This meant that McGuire could get into position and capture the duo jumping from the plane from an external perspective. After several seconds of freefall, visible in the footage is the instructor with the student attached to the harness. They reach for the parachute handle and deploy the canopy. Ivan McGuire, however, continues to fall. At this point he grabs for his ripcord and realises that he's jumped without his parachute. You can see him looking around briefly in a panic as he realises what's happened, and this is where the recording ends, or at least the publicly available portion of the recording. Ivan McGuire in freefall, panicking, the ground rapidly approaching. Ivan's camera captured the entire fall, which lasted approximately 1 minute. It's hard to comprehend what kind of thoughts might have gone through his head during this time, realizing that it's too late for any kind of help and that there's absolutely nothing he can do to save himself. A feeling of complete hopelessness and terror. Initially, authorities investigated the possibility that Ivan had done this deliberately, taking his own life in one last jump. They also wondered if his death was the result of foul play. The notion of McGuire's death being an accident seemed unlikely. Numerous regulations are in place to minimise the risk of such things happening. The pilot is required to check that everybody who's about to jump is wearing a parachute. However, as the investigation went on, it did look like most likely this was the result of an accident. Ivan's job as a skydiving photographer was not his only employment. Ivan also worked a night shift at Northern Telecom. This was a manufacturer of telephone equipment. He often spent his days at the parachute centre before heading off to his other job. Usually he left around midday, but on April 2nd he decided to stay a bit later. It was determined that most likely he was simply extremely tired on the day of the accident. Additionally, in 1988, camera equipment wasn't exactly light. The equipment that McGuire worked with was cumbersome and heavy. Parts of it were stored in a large backpack. It appears that Ivan mistook this backpack for his parachute, a mistake that seemed to have gone unnoticed by everybody else, including the pilots during the mandatory pre-jump check. The backpack containing McGuire's recording equipment was a similar size and shape to that of a parachute. In light of these findings, Ivan McGuire's death was ultimately ruled as an unfortunate accident. It was discovered that he'd forgotten his parachute earlier on, the very same day that he had his accident. Luckily, the first time round, his fellow jumpers had noticed his mistake and stopped him before he jumped. It begs the question though, why they didn't notice the second time round. Maybe they just thought that he wouldn't make the same mistake twice. When his body was recovered, it was found that despite his camera being completely shattered, the roll of film was able to be salvaged. The small segment of video that is publicly available has no audio, but apparently his final words were, "Oh my God, no." Ironically, Ivan McGuire, who had aspirations of becoming a famous skydiving photographer, has achieved a sort of posthumous fame through this harrowing footage that he recorded. His dream of capturing the exhilarating, dangerous essence of skydiving was realised, but at the ultimate cost. Yet again, the full footage will likely never be seen by most people, but exists somewhere in an archive. So that brings us to the end of the video. 2 more pieces of media that most of us will never see. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully you found the video interesting. While you're here, why not check out some of my other videos. As always, thank you very much to the patrons who are supporting the channel. Thank you very much. Apologies if my voice sounds a bit funny. I'm full of flu at the minute, but I'm soldiering on. So until next time, goodbye.